thankful for those that could stay. Yesterday, so many were telling me they weren't going to be here, so but they have to get to go to work and they have to be places. So I'm so glad you're here, and I'm not going to cut any corners. I've been around, and you have been around other prayer breakfasts, and I'm not a traditional prayer breakfast person. Usually it's predictable of we're going to talk about what we need to do with the faith of our forefathers, etc., etc. But today I'm going to talk about something. I may talk about myself just a little bit, but today I'm going to share with you in this time of how to create a Republican. I want to show you how, and I know because I've done it before, and I want to show because we all know that elections are, if they're proper, should be won by majority. And if the elections are proper, then we need Republicans and more Republicans. The more Republicans we have, the more chance of winning, right? So we want to know how to create Republicans, and I have a plan, and I've been working on it, and I'll tell you about it later as we move along. But he mentioned the background of 532 people. I always want to explain that because who in their right mind would start a church in a town that size? But Kathy and I traveled for a number of years, and we had a successful ministry. We traveled in a bus, and it was really successful. But I felt God moving me that I needed to get on the local level. And so we tried to figure it out. Anyway, in the town where we were, only about 12 miles from where we lived then in Smithton, my house was hit, I was in it, with an EF4 tornado. And so our house was condemned, and the tornado was a mile wide and on the ground for 10 miles. So housing was really hard to find. Our house was condemned, we had nowhere to live. And they came and offered, so this little town out here, we built a bunch of new houses and no money down, or anything, just move in. And so that's how we ended up in a town of 532 people, but we continued to travel, not knowing, I would ever start a church. But what happened then is I was offered a church in Chicago as an associate to inherit the church. A nice big church, great package. They offered, when you travel, you're sort of self-employed and you get what you can and do, but here's a great package of income and car allowance and house and job, money for her, and it was beautiful. And so I accepted, and now we're going to move. We're going to get out of the little town, which I didn't know anything about. I never left my house hardly and looked around or anything. And now we're going to go to Chicago. And in the meantime, this group of people came from Smithton, this little town, and said there's a historic site church over here. I didn't even know it was there. It was built in 1859, and it's been closed for 4 years. The last living trustee can't even mow the lawn, and it's going to be torn down. And they pleaded with me, said, please, would you take this church? I said, no, I'm going to Chicago, and who in their right mind would? First of all, there's no people, there's no money. It's sagging, and it needs a white church, real old. It's sagging, it's ugly, and I said no. A little time passed, they came back and asked me again. I said no. They came back again and asked me a third time. I still said no. But I did make one of the Christian mistakes of having integrity. I accidentally said, I'll pray about it. I had no intention really of praying about it. I only lived about a minute and a half, 2 minutes from where they met me. And in those 2 minutes, I thought, come on. I know the answer, but I said I would pray. So I went and I began to pray. I'm not one who shares like some of these people and they tell you how many, God speaks to them every day and they have a new revelation. I'm not that person. I went back and I got to pray. So I laid it out before God. There's Chicago, there's the money, it's a 1,000-member church already, and they want us to help us to grow, all this thing. And then I described this church, and I said, here's a church that's been closed for 4 years. It has no people, it has no money, it has no future in this town. And then I made the mistake and said, Jesus, remember the phrase, what would Jesus do? I said, Jesus, what would you do? Thinking I knew the answer, and from heaven I heard this, I'll tell you what I would do. I would raise the dead. And immediately all the blood left me because I went, you would. You would, wouldn't you? Not my choice, but you would. So I called Chicago. They kept begging, saying, what, did you get a better deal? And not exactly. Do you need more money? Yes, but I'm not going to get it. So we opened the church and went along. It was successful in small town church, but nobody cared. We eventually had, we had a great group of 150 people, very faithful, very lively, and considered successful, but still it's in the town of 532 people. And what happened then, if you've ever lived in a really small town, they're run by the power of gossip and rumor. And I was no exception. They didn't really like my church that much anyway, because there's a reason why they locked it up before. It was getting too lively, and they locked it up. And so I'm a lively person. I'm very enthusiastic. I'm a little quiet when I'm by myself, but when it comes to God and speaking and church, I love a lively church, which we have. And so I was all set for that, and then that rumor and gossip thing, and how do people even, as we look at politics today, it's confusing, because how do people turn evil? How do people that are normal, they look normal, but all of a sudden they turn and live differently, speak differently? Well, that happened to me. The church was doing great, and I started not doing great. And I just kept going downhill, and finally I thought, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. And so I left on a journey. It was a 2-week journey. Spent every day praying. At night I'd go to church, and I just trying to put my, I wasn't speaking. I didn't talk to anybody. I quit eating. I quit speaking. That was it. I called Kathy and said, I'm going to come home, but unless God does something, I'm not going to start over. This is it. But I'll give God the opportunity. So I drove back, and I'm walking through the same door that I walk through every week, and I felt absolutely nothing. The music is already going. The service had already started. It was a Sunday night service when we had those, and I thought, well, I'll just walk. I'm not going to do this, but I'll walk in there. I flip open the door, and everybody looks, and there's Kathy about 20 feet away, and the only thought that came to my mind is, you've been gone for 2 weeks. The whole church is looking at you. You should give your wife a hug, because it's going to look. You just do that, So that's what I went to do, and I started walking, and all these people are there, and I started walking, and I got within about a foot of you, and I reached out to hug her. And this is the story that's touched nations. I've traveled the world, and from there, because at that point, people looked at me like, what did you do wrong that God put you in this place? But at that moment, my life was about to change. I reached out to give Kathy a hug, and I'm just going to tell you the truth, what happened. Everybody was watching, and suddenly from heaven, it was like a lightning bolt struck me, and it was like I'd been electrocuted, and it changed my life forever. I've never been the same since. I began to try that night and night and night, and what happened was I was so changed that I was able to really change other people. And all of a sudden, people began to hear the story, which is too long to tell the whole thing, but just to give you an idea. They began to hear the story, and they would invite me places, and then when I tell the story and I preach and do those things, their lives started being changed. And I found out a lot of people would like to experience God in a real way. And so, yes, and so from there, that's where he told you the story was launched, where I was a pastor that nobody really ever listened to. Nobody had got my recordings or anything like that. And suddenly, it's all of a sudden 10,000 recordings a month were going out of me. I was invited all over the world. As you said, 250,000 people came to that town. There was more people in the church than there were in the town, and packed it out. Then we moved to Kansas City, and we had another, in 2008, the Daystar Television Network saw what was happening. We had another surge, and they aired us for 3 years all over the world, 200 nations, and they paid for the whole thing. And so that has continued on. And now, in this journey, I sort of stepped back. I wasn't in the spotlight. I wasn't traveling. I wasn't writing. And I know some of you have heard and got the card about the book. And as the country began to make a turn out of the pandemic and be where it is today, I felt like it's time for me, and I had people encourage me to step back in. And as I'm stepping back in, it's a different journey, because I'm not really stepping into the church world as much as just into the world, and feeling that now is the time that I need to speak out and tell you what I think about this, because I know that it is time for the spiritual to meet the political. And if you think about it, in our country, we have great churches, thousands of churches and pastors, but if you think about, okay, who's the voice in our lives of politics? We know, you voted last night, you know. We know we have a voice, we have some other outstanding people, Mike Lindell, that are voices. And then you think, who's the voice that we're listening to that's calling us to the Spirit that mixes that with the political? And I think, I don't know, but I'm willing to try. And so part of that is what I want to tell you today. So I spent a year from last May to the May before, a year, May to May. And I woke up every night at 2 o'clock, not on purpose, but did. And I got up and I'd pray an hour, hour and a half or whatever. And that's not my policy. I'm a praying person, but not like that. And the year passed and it was May. And that's when God began to change. I was mostly doing the talking. And I began to get a message that I feel is from God, and you're going to have to be the judge of that. It's a very important message. And I began to hear this phrase, and it's in the book, if you got it. I began to hear this phrase. We are waging a war we cannot win in our current condition. And then sometimes it was added, we are waging a war we cannot win in our current spiritual condition. And so that's what I am setting out to try to change and to alert and to help people understand what needs to be done and what we can do. I sort of felt like when I started this and thinking about this and starting to aim my life. I have a great church that has a great staff, so I'm free. I founded it. I'm free to do what I want pretty much and go however I want to. But as I entered this, I felt like, and I'm with you on this, I think, I felt like that I was entering I'm lost in the woods. You know, I see things, I hear things, I watch, you know, all the politics and news, and I feel like we're wandering in the woods and we're not sure what to do. And as I felt like I was wandering in the woods, and then it feels like now there's so many obstacles. It's like I'm wandering, I'm lost in the woods, and I've come across a giant grizzly bear who has stood up on his feet and growling. And I'm standing there trying to think what to do. And the only thing I can think of is I hope I'm eaten last. That's the only thing I can think. I mean, that's our hope right now. We've got to change some things so that we get a different hope. And so that's my journey, and that's why I want you to get the book too. It's free. I'm not trying to make any money or anything like that. So just a little bit about me. And I want to talk to you then, really important, of why I'm going to vote for Donald Trump. And there's a reason why. And I tell this to people and help correct them, because in the last election, as you know a lot about it, in the last election though, I met a ton of people who go to church, that consider Christians good people, all that stuff. And I would ask them and we'd talk and they'd want to know different things. And I found out that so many of them voted for the person that they thought they would like. I vote, you know, they said, well, I don't know if I like him, I like him. And I said, what are you thinking? I said, I'm not going to do that, and I'm not going to do that now. I don't say I don't like him, but I'm just saying that's not a good way to vote. I said, I'm not voting for the person I like. I'm voting for the person that will keep my family safe. I want to keep them safe. And I know that he will do that. And in my heart, he's the only one that will do it. He'll keep us safe. He'll give us a future. And I want the people in my church, I want them to vote just because I want them to stay safe. And the person that I've heard people refer to President Trump and others, you know, like he's almost our savior. And I don't mind that because I understand we need to be saved. But I like a better character in the Bible that I think is more relevant to who and what's going on in our nation right now. To me, Donald Trump is a Noah. Because Noah, it said Noah built an ark, or Noah built a boat to save his family. And so I see that Noah had a message. Now the interesting thing that people miss about that is Noah was not he didn't build boats. He built a boat, but he's not a boat builder. The Bible says that Noah was a preacher, particular interest to me. And he's a preacher of right things, righteousness. He preached what was right. Now, obviously, if he was a preacher, he can't be a preacher if he doesn't preach to somebody. And who was he preaching to? Obviously that generation. That generation was pretty wicked, had some pretty wicked things going on, but they didn't act like they were wicked. It says they were eating, Jesus describes it. They were eating and drinking and giving in marriage, which is just like saying ordinary life. They were living ordinary life like nothing's wrong. And they had no idea that a flood was coming. And one of the things I thought of is imagine how history could have been changed if they had listened. But they didn't. But could it have changed? You know, they were pretty sinful, like I said, wild living, all kinds of ideas, some similar to what we have today. But what would have happened if they had to change their mind? Repented, whatever you want to say. They changed the heart, had to change the heart. They listened to the preaching of Noah. It happens. You know, God doesn't have a problem with sinners. He's got a plan, right? He's got a plan. He talks about it. He's got a plan. But the problem with that generation was not their sin. I mean, he could have handled that. In fact, they could have changed history had they listened. They could have one thing, they could have built a boat. Anybody can build a boat. If he can do it, you can do it, and put your family on it. Wasn't anything stopping them. God didn't, say, I'm going to destroy everybody but you if they build boats. Too bad. They could have built a boat. But even greater history change, if they had have changed directions of their life, there would have been no need for a flood. The flood was God's answer to what was happening that he had had enough of. But they could have changed history. In other words, the flood was inevitable because of their lives, but it was also preventable if they changed. And so as you look at that, in the book and the subtitle of it, I realized something. That God has a plan for sinful people, sins. He always has. He's got a great plan. One thing he has no plan for, because here was their problem. Their problem was not that they had sin. It's not that they were sinless, right? But they're gonna die in a flood because they're clueless. They're clueless. See, they could have answered. The history said everybody can repent. The city of Nineveh, Jonah went and they repented and all that kind of stuff, and it changed, and disaster didn't happen. They could have done the same thing. We don't think of it most of the time, but they could have. And that's why I like to relate President Trump to Noah, because he is building an ark. He wants to build it. People don't understand it. And the problem is Donald Trump, and I think why he gets opposition, Donald Trump is not clueless. And clueless people don't understand what he's doing. Right? Just like Noah. This is a huge ark. You can't miss it. But they were clueless. They didn't get it. They didn't know. And it says they did not know about the flood and what was happening until the flood was upon them and the door was already shut. And obviously, that's too late. That's too late. And that's why we need you, me, our presidential candidates and other people to be able to do this so that we can keep ourselves safe and choose a leader and leaders, not just one leader, leaders that will help us stay safe. One of the problems, though, that we come up against, and this is where I noticed something, I noticed something this weekend. Out of all the speakers that spoke, all have something in common. Nobody likes them. It's at this point that I may be honored to join that crowd as I tell you really what's on my heart, not just what I just said, but some more, because I work in this realm of religion, churches, and I watch them very carefully. And I tried and visited with churches and leaders to help them understand that the religion we have today, Christian, and you're probably church type people. And it's sort of a law in church type that you don't talk about other churches, so I won't. I'll just talk about religion in general. But we have created, in my opinion, we are in trouble. We waging a war we cannot win in our current spiritual condition, not understanding that the lifestyle of Christianity in our country is not the same as it was in the first century and the first Christians and the first churches. Their attitudes, you read about it, and they use words and phrases and commitment. And then as I listen to other preachers in churches and they're sincere as can be, I'm not being critical of them, but they're clueless of what needs to be said today. Because what we've done in America is we have created our own God in our own image. We've created our own Jesus. We have what I call a commercialized Jesus. I mean, the commercialized Jesus just happens to like everything you like. The commercialized Jesus is very comfortable with you and your lifestyle. He requires no change, no commitment, no sacrifice. And so we go to church and we hear, and I'm telling you, there's many that are really sincere, but they're preaching the only thing they know. It's what they heard. And it's a commercialized Jesus, and so the words sacrifice and commitment and strength and all those things. Instead, we go to church and we are actually enabled to stay like we are. And so we hear a great sermon on, you poor thing, poor victim, hang on, God loves you, everything's okay, try to make it another week till we can come back and I can tell you to do that again. And there's no transformation, and I can say that because you know what? I became a different person. I suddenly realized what happened to Paul on the road to Damascus. He became a different person. I always wanted to do that. I didn't particularly like myself, but I didn't know how. I didn't know it could be done. I didn't know, really, to be honest and transparent, I really didn't know the good news. I found out after talking and doing this for years now, that I meet pastors and leaders, of course, church leaders, worship leaders, whatever, Sunday school teachers. And it's surprising that probably over 99% cannot tell me what the good news is. And just so I don't go too far and upset you too much, you may not know it either, but you do know it. You know it, but you don't know it because it's not what's being said. So the good news, what is the good news? How do I know that you know the good news? It's because every year we celebrate Christmas. When I was a kid, I think one year I was a wise man, and then they demoted me to a shepherd with a towel on my head. And we walk down the aisle and everything, you've seen it, pageantry. And then there's an angel, only one, but one. And the angel then made the announcement. And what was the announcement? Behold, I bring you good news of great joy. All right, I'm ready. What is it? God has just come down. God comes down. And if you read through the whole Bible, the greatest moments there, God came down. They cried out to God and he came down. He parted the sea. He made the walls of Jericho fall when they shouted. Gideon with 300 defeated the Midianites. God came down. And all through the Bible, and then the great news, Jesus was born in Bethlehem. What? God came down. And when they were doing great things and the church was motivated in the first century, and Jewish people and non-Jewish people motivated for Jesus. And you know what was happening? They were having services, they were having meetings, they were having apostles, and great things were happening because God was coming down. And people were experiencing the living God. Now today, you don't hear the good news, it's called something else. The good news today is about the best the church can do. And that is, we don't know what to do, but we want to give you the good news. What's that? If you die today, you have a home in heaven. Great. I have a problem with that. I don't plan on dying today. What if I don't? What if I don't die today? What am I supposed to be doing? What do I have to offer? What is good for me? And that's what I'm telling you. The good news is God still comes down. I know he came down to me. He came down. And so people don't have that expectation because they hear good news is I'm going away. The good news, I'm going somewhere. But I don't have to go anywhere. I can stay here and God can come down. And then when we start to tell that to people, and I start to tell what the message I thought was said, we are waging a war we cannot win. The culture war, the crime war, immigration war, inflation war, and we're sort of planning on, if we can just get our candidate elected, everything will be okay. But it's bigger than that, because we need a God who comes down and helps us. Even with a new president, in my opinion, we are not prepared for the other nations and what they would like to do. Whether they do it this year or next year, we already know. China, North Korea, Iran, different nations. You know what? They're already planning to attack us if they can. They're looking for the opportunity. Already China has the greatest navy in the world. We used to have it. And are we going to be so naive to think, hey, we're America. We're the Christian, nation. We're safe. He's going to, our president will help us. Our God will help us. We're in good shape. We just need to get this election done. And it's not going to work that way. I'll tell you a Bible story on that one. This is a really powerful, and I know this is important for you to hear. Okay. So after Jesus does his thing, and he's doing it, and he's getting towards the end of his ministry, and you all know he's going to be crucified and all that kind of stuff. He's caught weeping, and if you read it and study it in the languages and the Greek and all that, I mean hard, emotional, something's coming out of him, just overwhelming. And it says he's weeping over Jerusalem. And he says, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, if you only knew. What does that tell you? Clueless. If you only knew what could make for peace. You see, at that time, as you know, Rome was occupying. And it's funny that when you say the Jewish people, I make reference because it's similar to our day. It was being run by a few people. It wasn't regular it's not Jewish people, but it was being run, and they were corrupt. The Bible says they love money, they love to be seen, all those kinds of things. And so when Jesus came, he surprised them. And it would surprise you too. I mean, if we were there and Jesus started preaching and he had a pulpit, I mean, we kind of expect him to preach against the Romans because they were bad. They had male and female prostitution bathhouses, and they had naked statues, and they're bringing their culture in. And so, okay, here he is. He's the Messiah. Let him have it. Let them know what's waiting for them if they don't change. And Jesus didn't do that. He started preaching to his own and he said, I was sent to the lost house of Israel. And he preached to his own, and he said, no, you're the problem. You're the problem. See, I don't think they were as much anti-Messiah and anti-Jesus as they were I don't want to be the problem. And I don't want to be the problem either. But that's why he didn't fit the mold. If he had have led an army, which, did you know, there were people then storing up spears and swords and shields. They did. They're going to attack Rome. And you know why they thought they of course they're the mini army, right? But God is with us. We're God's people, and we can do this. It's happened before. We've been in the minority, and we were able to attack the majority, and we won against all these people. And so that's the message that the zealots were preaching. Yeah, would you like this? An interesting note that you don't get to hear very often, since I have your attention and you're having so much fun. Did you know that we know 12 apostles, those. Did you know all of them were from the area of Galilee, except Judas? Guess where he was from originally? The Jerusalem area. He grew up, my understanding, he grew up hearing that message. God's going to send a Messiah, and we're going to win against Rome. So the other guys out in the country, they didn't really indoctrinate, so they were trying to listen. So when Jesus said he was going to die, and he was going to die on the cross, and he's going to die, and he's going to be the sacrificial lamb and all, I think it just didn't compute, because he thought, no, you're here to help us win against our enemies. And so when Jesus was weeping over Jerusalem, he said, if you only knew what would make for peace, but it's hidden from your eyes. So then he told him basically what I'm telling you. And he said, because of that, what I've said, talking about Jesus, and it's hidden, you don't get it, you're clueless. This is what he said: your enemies are going to come. Your enemy is going to come, and it's going to throw you and your children to the ground. He was prophesying in 70 AD. Rome did retaliate. They destroyed Jerusalem, destroyed the temple, and you may not know this. They crucified 500 men a day till they ran out of wood. We don't hear this. History doesn't teach it to us. It was the tragic, and actually Israel and Judaism has not survived that until they became a nation. And it's starting again. They're starting to move again, obviously. And so he said, you don't know. If you knew, then you could respond. Then we could stop what's going to happen in 70 AD. But they didn't know, and they didn't get it, and nobody was telling them. And so it happened. They were thrown to the ground. They were murdered. A million were killed. 1 million Jews were killed in that against Rome. But you know, it's the same thing. Jesus is not just crying because of the destruction. In my opinion, he is crying so violently because he knows what's going to take place was preventable. It could have been prevented. How do you prevent it? Stop being clueless. If you're not clueless, then all you have to do is respond the way God wants us to, because we understand it, and we can change history. Otherwise, if we stay like we are, if the word is right, we can't win in our spiritual condition. Now, you may think I'm being a little critical, but I hope you'll trust me enough to know this is what I do. Right now, what I do, I have nothing better to do than what I'm doing right now. This is what I do. And so I spend in the world and behind the scenes. When I got my two times my little rise of fame, and like he said, Newsweek and Time and San Francisco Chronicle interviewed me and all that kind of stuff, and all those things. I got to go behind the scenes. I was a nobody. I didn't know anybody. I got to go behind the scenes from some of the greatest ministries in the world and meet them and see them. Music industry. I graduated. I wasn't Christian when I graduated from college, but I have a degree in instrumental, vocal music, and education. So I taught high school for a little bit. I have a lifetime teaching certificate. I'm one of the rarest, and Kathy does too, in the whole world. They gave us lifetime teaching certificates, and we still have them today. I went on and studied with the Berean School of the Bible, and got licensed, and I got ordained, and all the things that you do. And then I was very privileged some years ago when we came to Kansas City. There's a all-black theology school of theology. And they asked me to come, they talked to me, and they awarded me, the first white person, and they were very excited about it, an honorary doctorate of theology, as the only white person they've ever done that to. But it was a big moment for them and me to see that they see something. It was a great honor. And I worked in the years in media too at the same time. I've won 3 Emmys, by the way, and a satirical writing on religion. It was funny that you laughed, but it was a little bit too much truth to it. Similar to I got to that, and a number of awards, and so when I say these things to you, I want you to understand I've seen what's going on, and I was troubled, always been troubled since I know that it's the same thing. Yesterday and last night, and the other people, they understand that. If you go to the bottom line of the politics now, and this is not everybody, obviously, but money pretty much runs most people, most politicians. I mean, I was talking to somebody yesterday about it, and I said, are we so foolish to believe that billionaires suddenly are interested in what you're doing with your sex life? Are they really care that you get settled on this or who you are? Are you kidding me? I mean, there's money behind it somewhere. When you see a corporation make a really stupid decision, they're not stupid. I don't think it was wise, but in their minds, they're doing something worthwhile. Money. So when you cross over, then it's a heartbreaker for most people that don't understand that the religious system in America is also run by money. They don't talk about it in the services, but they talk about it all week before the services. What can we do to get crowds and money and advance? And even the ones that don't have any want it. I mean, they may not have it, they may have a small church or whatever, but they're admiring those that do and copying their sermons. And so what's happened then when that does us, we are very much, in my opinion, we are very much like the Jewish leaders of that day when Jesus pronounced that they were in trouble. They were blind to it. And so we created a Jesus that we're very comfortable with. You can go to most churches today and you'll be very comfortable. There won't be any, that you won't hear hardly any. There are exceptions, and I love the exceptions, but just generally across the board, people, preachers, churches, institutions have realized that if we continue to talk about their hurts and their condition, they'll come back. And in fact, not just in the church world, in all the world, right now I feel like we've got so many opportunists. If I turn on and listen to somebody talking on the radio about the condition of our nation and political, it could be religious or political. And I notice that all they do is talk about the same old problems. So here's our guest for today, and he's going to explain to us how big a trouble we're in and how bad everything is, and we need to elect and we need to do, okay? And now for my next guest, you're going to sit and listen while he tells you how bad everything is again. We got all these problems, and then I go like, how about solutions? How about telling me, what do we need to do? And that's what I want to help you understand, because we must add, if it's not me, it's okay, but we must add a spiritual voice to the political arena, because it's part of it. We need God to come down. We need God to come down. And so, without sounding critical, I don't want to be critical, because I said many of the preachers, they're just preaching what they know. But they're not teaching that. And I have found that most people, not everyone, but most people would like a fresh voice that says, tell me what to do. And what we need to do is exactly what Jesus wanted them to do, what Noah wanted them to do, and that is that God's people, the people who believe, we have to have a change of heart. We cannot create a God in our own image that's comfortable with us. We have to get new language. We need to change our vocabulary. We need to begin to understand that the greatest thing we can do to help turn the nation, turn our own lives, is add words to our vocabulary where I'm no longer going to a church that makes me feel comfortable. I want a church that makes me feel strong. I want to hear a sermon that tells me how to be strong. I want to know how to win. I want to know how to stay married. I want to know how to get out of debt. I want to know how I can get in touch with God. I don't want to hear about my feelings. I don't want to talk my feelings anymore. My feelings are what have got me in trouble in the first place. I'm supposed to die to myself, not find myself. And we don't hear it. And so we have, what I'm saying today is sincere people, but keeping this thing going with a middle of the road, riding the fence religion that keeps us right where we are. Because if God is satisfied, and he loves me that much, and I know he does, but that's not the point today. If God is absolutely satisfied with what we're doing and what the churches are doing, then we have no problem. He's going to pull us through no matter what, a miraculous God. But if we follow the Bible pattern of when churches, religious, and other generations too, move off to where money and the love of money, want to be seen and all that kind of stuff, and I don't care if preachers make money, I'll make more if I get to, but that's not my point. My point is the message is catering to our feelings so that we stay sick and not change. Because we're not told, we don't say, listen, we got to make changes. We got to stop being middle of the road, comfortable Christians, and add to our vocabulary words like, let's sacrifice. We need to be committed to God. There is no backslidden Christian. It doesn't exist. There's backslidden, but no backslidden Christians. And I've heard so many sermons that, about you're saved, you're a Christian, but you're backslidden. What? That's going the wrong way, isn't it? Backslidden is back. And I've heard the term lukewarm Christian. What? It's impossible. There's no such thing as one, because if you're lukewarm, it says God's going to spit you out of his mouth. And I think we sometimes think that God's standing around with a mouthful of people, but it's okay, because we're still in his mouth. I'm sorry, he spit already. He said he would do it. They don't exist, but we're told they exist to make us comfortable. And I like a challenge. I like hard work. I like a life without fear. Nobody is totally removed of fear, but I've worked really hard to not live by fear. I don't let fear make a decision. And I want that for you. I want that for the American people. And the American people need to understand how now I'll get to how we're going to create Republicans. And so that I'm sort of on the end of the speech here. How do you create Republicans? I'll tell you how I did it. When I got the notoriety, as I told you about, and I was on TV shows and everything like that, obviously. And so I would get invited all over the country and all over the world, and we would go. Well, when I got there, I knew that I already knew, I'm not going to speak like other people speak. I'm not going to be like them. I'm just going to tell them what happened to me and what needs to be done. And I found something out. I did a lot of conferences for pastors around the world, and I have a particular soft place for them. And I would do those, and they would listen. There might be 2,000, 1,000 pastors in Singapore or Japan or here in different cities that I could name. And almost every single time when I really began to talk to them as they needed to be talked to, I very seldom, and we've got videos of this from everywhere, I very seldom ever got to finish my sermon or have an altar call. I was in a particular city. They invited me to a Jewish conference, a Jewish Christian conference, And they gave me these instructions. They said, at the end, we want you to mention these cards. And everybody that wants to be saved or wants to be prayed for, whatever, we're going to hand them a card, and then we're going to lead them off out of the room and get their information for the local pastors and leaders. Okay, if you want me to do that, I like to follow directions. If you want me to do that, I'll do that. And I had the card and all that. I spoke about, there were 5,000 people there. And I spoke about 20 minutes. And I told them what happened to me. I spoke about 20 minutes. Into it, 1,000 people rushed to the front. I mean, ran. There goes their cards. Nobody had a card. So desperate. These pastors' conferences, I go to them and I start, because they understand when you say you were broken, you were betrayed. I was betrayed. I won't say what happened, but we got out of it pretty easily. It's just my heart was broken, so I was broken. And they understand that. And I can talk their language, but anyway, they had all different backgrounds. They had political ideas. They could have been, they can be Democrats or independents or whatever. But when I got done talking to them about God coming down, I found out how hungry they were to have that happen to them. And so I would get through and tell my story, what happened and how I went around and what's happening with people. And almost, not every time, but almost every time, in churches, in auditoriums, I never really finished because people would just run down. And I can't describe to you what a real altar call, I guess you call it, prayer time is when people can't stand it anymore. They want me to stop because they want to get going with their own lives and pray. And I mean, run, 1,000, run. We have videos of it. And it was pretty shocking when it first started happening. And I don't care if it ever happens again. That's not my point. I'm just telling you what happened. When I was used to watching crusades on television that were so controlled, and I noticed that the theme song is always the same, Just As I Am. Well, that's somebody not planning on changing. I don't have a plea, but here I am like I am. I get it, but it was very controlled. And this would look very much out of control. And I'll go to churches, same thing, many different political views. They weren't sure they even liked me at first because they don't know if they want to make changes. They don't know what this word revival means. They don't know. My church is very, very excited all the time for Jesus. And just it's such an experience to go to church there, not just a service. But when I'm done, when we're done and I start meeting people, and I prayed for pedophiles, child abusers, demonic people, everything. I prayed for everything. And they changed. And when they changed, I found out girls that were there, hundreds over the country, pregnant. They decided not to get an abortion. I didn't tell them not to get an abortion. I didn't tell them they weren't supposed to take that right. I did not preach. I don't preach abortion sermons. Because sometimes it just divides us. I preach what changes the heart and mind so people don't want to get an abortion. Or they don't want to do drugs anymore because something else has happened to them. So in my opinion, I'm going to make my goal, I'm working on a plan, is I want to make more Republicans. And I think what I want to do is I want to go to certain towns, and it's going to take something because I realize, and I won't take too long now, I'm going to quit, but just a little more inside information. I have a problem because the churches have become pretty worldly minded, and that's their goal, big, famous, all that stuff. I'm gonna, like Jesus, I have to meet them where they are. And there's really not that much interest in the churches right now with some guy coming and telling them they need to be revived and changed and we're the problem. However, one of the things that's coming out of places like this is meeting people that are outside my Christian circle. They're not that they're not believers, but I've been working in that circle. And so that's who I work with, and that's who I would communicate with, and that's how I go. But because I'm working outside of it now, and I get to meet someone like Mike Lindell and others, then when I go, it's not me going as that preacher coming to preach to you. It's going with these men and women who they respect outside, saying, you need to listen to this guy. But I can't go second class. I need to go and treat them first class because that's kind of what they want. I'm not saying that's my end goal, but they want that. Need to meet, not with the churches. You know, we're missing something here. There are thousands and thousands of Christian leaders and pastors. Thousands, right? But who do they speak to? Thousands and thousands. Every week, right now, this morning. Thousands of people are going to listen to a person. And so, it only makes sense. I can't go to all the churches again. I went hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. I can't do that. There's not enough time. So what I want to do is make this plan to go to some cities and just attract the leaders and pastors. That's it. One day, day and a half, have a huge lunch, pay for everything. Don't dare take up an offering because they're gonna go, oh yeah, well too bad you got this idea before me. No money, not take any of their money, treat them right, and tell them the story of my life, and get them to understand and hunger. Because the more you hear it as a spiritual leader, the more you say that he's talking to me. I know exactly how he feels. I'm in that condition too, and it just works. It just works with them. And so I want to do that. And up to now in the election, I'm working on a plan. I know the part of the problem is right now everybody needs money. You know, everybody's wanting money and needs money. This is a little bit different plan. I'm hoping some people will say, I like a fresh plan. And so what happened then, after I preached and taught, I found out that those pastors that came down and I prayed with them and I counseled with them, and then, you know what? They became conservatives. Not because of me, but because the Spirit of the living God is a conservative. And probably a Republican. But I didn't have to tell them abortion was wrong, drugs is wrong. You need to stop being a deadbeat dad, or you need to start being an honest preacher, or whatever, or a politician. I didn't have to say any of that because it was all said for me. And I found out that one split second in the presence of God, the real thing, not just God's in the house thing, but I mean the real thing that happened to me and others, can change you forever. And if I can accomplish this and do my part, I think I can make and create some Republicans. More Republicans means more Republican voters. And I don't have to change them. I'm not going to tell them, and trust me, I'm not going to start talking about their sexual preference, identities, or anything like that. I don't have to. They are what they are. If they've done it, they've done it. If they haven't, they haven't. I'm thinking about it. All I have to do is have them have that second, 2 seconds. Mine was less than 5 seconds, but boy, I was electrified. I was pretty conservative in that respect, like I just preach like this and talk. When that thing happened to me, I'm a little embarrassed to tell you, but I went walking and leaping and praising God, and some people say I twirled. I've never twirled in my life that I have any memory of it, and I don't plan on doing it again. But the people that were there and watched, they watched me become different. And at that point, there was no question of right and wrong. I knew whether I could be that person was one thing. But the fact that I wanted to be that person is what God saw. I want to be that. I don't want to be a coward. I don't want to be middle of the road. I want to stand for something. I want to be excited for God and not have to be embarrassed. So what we need then, and the second part of it, I have had some inroads a few years ago into Hollywood, and I haven't kept at that. I was able to produce one film, which I just wanted to do. I wrote it and paid for it, and fortunately broke even. But I got to meet a lot of Hollywood people. And so what we need now is we need Hollywood, we need movie stars, track stars, football stars, rock stars. I think they're opening. They're opening. And we need to influence them. So that all of a sudden we're seeing a new sway across our country where religion is not a joke, pastors are not all crooked, talking spiritual is not an embarrassment. I want to end with telling you this story. You may know it, but it's always good to review it because this is who you are today. If you know your history, and I'm not going to mention everything that was going on, but in 1857, our country was similar in some ways as we are now. Things were going bad. The Ohio Bank or whatever that controlled a lot of the money was faltering. They were going to close. The railroads were stopping. Life was bad. Crime is similar, even though it's 1857. And they didn't know what to do, and it wasn't getting better. But one man, his last name was Lamphere, I think I would pronounce it right, in New York City, he got given the chance to be a part of a Dutch Reformed church that was dying because nobody was coming. And they gave him the job of trying to make their church grow. He did, and it didn't work. He suddenly got the idea, he said, I wonder what would happen. Maybe we need to pray. Maybe we need to start there. So he started a noon prayer meeting, and he invited, and I think maybe 6 people showed up. Because look at the state of things. People just didn't have that hunger. They didn't have that desire to have a God thing. They were happy. They were satisfied with who they are. We complain a lot while we play with our $100 or $1,000 gadgets, our phones, and we complain, but look all we have. And so he got the idea, and so he started meeting with them at noon. He was a former businessman, so he kind of tapped into businessmen. All of a sudden in New York City, the businessmen's prayer meeting began to take off. And they began to pray. Unbelievably, as it might feel today that it could happen in our day, that prayer revival, that revival spread completely across our country. It went nationwide and even internationally, but in our country. People were praying. They stopped going to places they went. They changed their lifestyle. This was real interest, and it changed. And guess what? This is what happened. This is why it was such a God thing at the same hour where we are. Out of that, this group, the praying people, saw to it that a name that Abraham Lincoln got elected. They got him elected. And the revival wanted somebody new. They wanted Honest Abe, I guess. And guess what else happened? Not only that, out of that came the Emancipation Proclamation because it was against slavery. The Dred Scott decision was going on at that time, and people were discouraged about it. Emancipation Proclamation. And then what would interest all of you? Out of that movement came something that they'd never heard of before. 3 letters. GOP. Was started out of that prayer revival. Whether you got to read about it or not, you can read about it now. 1857. Changed our nation. You wouldn't think, all the stuff going on, so bad then. What happened? What happened? How does that happen? I can't just tell people to do it. Can't tell people to live this way or think, what happened? You know what happened? God came down. That's what he does. He does. That's what he does. And at certain times in history, he even comes stronger, more liberal in his love and grace that you can't hardly miss it. The favor of God is on everyone. Whether you deserve it, whether you think you're good or bad, something's happening to make it very easy to connect to God. And that's what I want to see happen. I'm not wanting to push religion. I want to save our nation. And I know that We cannot say, well, don't worry. We can be nominal. We can be moderate Christians. We can show up and hear sermons all about ourselves. And then as soon as church is over, we, go to watch the football game, which Kansas City's big on that. Go Chiefs. And, they're big on it in Kansas City. And I got to get them, it's okay with me. But I got to get them big on God. That's what, if we can do that. And it starts with people like you that begins to say, you know what? I'd like to be a different person too. Not completely different maybe, but I want to have what other people had in history that changed our world. Like Donald Trump, they mentioned last night, President Trump. What courage. How does he do it? May God continue to do it through him. But we're a part of this too. We've got to be, if you want to, be like him. Or be like Noah. Because, in my opinion, we will eventually go to war. But it is preventable. It's not inevitable. It's going that direction. I believe we will end up in a war eventually. Not maybe sooner than we think. I mean, look at what's happening now in our world. But I also believe that with what I'm saying today, if we take it seriously, and I know some of you hearing it for the first time, and you love your church, good for you. I may have nailed it and said, oh, I think he's talking about my church. I don't know what church you go to, but if we can take this seriously, not just you, but across the country, and begin to hear this message and go on radio talk shows and all those things, podcasts, maybe we can start turning. And if we do, in my opinion, a war is not inevitable. The flood is preventable. And if we take this, it happened in 1857, it happened at other times, but 1857, what a great example of what could happen to the people of America. It's hard to imagine, isn't it? It's hard to imagine that we no longer have the kind of religion that's being made fun of, that people don't want to talk about. They don't want to have anything to do with you. It's hard to imagine, but it is possible. So that's my mission. That's what I've heard. I want us to win this war. Every war we're fighting, there's many, many battles. I want us to win this war. But my word is we've got to take this seriously, that if we don't do something different, we are not in the spiritual condition that we maybe think we are, that we can call on heaven, and heaven's going to automatically come down and save us from the other nations and save us inflation, save our economy, which is frightening. But I want to tell you and end with the good news. God comes down. He always has, and he still will. We're just not used to it in our generation. We just don't know it. So, what do you do with good news? Paul wrote, how can they hear if they don't have a preacher? I just told it to you. And now you decide what you want to do with it. I want to thank you, Lou, and those that I just met recently, and JD here, who has known me. I didn't really know him, but he knew about me. Giving me this opportunity to share this message. I don't think you're going to hear it in a lot of places. So I hope it means something to you. There's no condemnation in it. It's all forward movement. We're all going to become better. And we're going to see God save our nation until we can sing, America, America, God has shed his grace on thee. Thank you, everybody.